But I'm really pleased to introduce Tom Scarborough. Tom is the SVP and Senior Director of Extended Security Programs at Fifth Third Bank, and he is going to be taking us through this really wonderful presentation today. Hi, Tom. Great to have you here.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Robert. And thanks to all the attendees. I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today about the cyber-related, the cyber fraud-related threats that are impacting businesses and organizations of all size, and what you can do to protect yourselves and better protect yourselves against those threats.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I gotcha.
Sure.
Here we go.
Thank you. A brief introduction overview we've kind of covered. I'm going to talk about what I believe are the two top cybersecurity and fraud-related threats, as we talked about, which is business email compromise, or BEC, and ransomware. And again, as we walk through this, we'll go through some best practices that you can implement within your organizations to, again, help better protect yourselves from these threats. So this is a little bit of an older slide, but I think it really tells, it continues to tell a really good story about kind of the threat landscape and how it continues to evolve. Modern organizations and individuals alike are becoming more and more exposed to their increasing interconnectedness via the proliferation of cloud-based applications, mobile solutions, and of course, the Internet of Things. And that blends the use of consumer and corporate technologies in many of these environments. The result of this is a rapidly growing attack surface that is increasingly difficult for your security and operational teams to protect. The expanding attack surface from the network perimeter beyond is ever expanding and shifting. And especially when you consider the proliferation, again, of cloud and the increased use and dependencies on third parties. And as this slide depicts, there's no shortage of motivated and well-funded threat actors across the threat landscape. And unfortunately, cybercrime is profitable. We've all seen the statistics over the years, and we'll explore them further as part of our discussion today. But we know that the threat actors are unfortunately making a lot of money at the expense of innocent victims, and there's a well-established underground economy that supports it. And the attacks themselves continue to evolve and become more sophisticated. Contributing to this, we continue to see a sharp increase in the number of what we call zero-day vulnerabilities. These are vulnerabilities that emerge that do not have a known patch or remediation for them. And it's a pretty alarming trend. Back in, I don't have updated numbers for this time so far this year, but in 2019 and 2020 combined, we saw a total of 62 zero-day vulnerabilities announced. In 2021 alone, it was 80 reported 0 days. And that's the highest number that's ever been reported in a calendar year. So let's jump into some discussion about business email compromise. Next slide, please. The business email compromise is largely an account takeover. It's not always an actual account takeover. There's ways that the criminals and the fraudsters can make you believe that the account has been taken over and that you're getting a legitimate email. And we'll talk through some of that. But what's interesting about business email compromise is it's not new. It's been around for a while. I think it first really became prominent in the 2012, 2013 timeframe, but we weren't really talking about it and really understanding how widespread and how impactful it was until 2015, 2016. And this really not only speaks to financial institutions, organizations that are impacted, but even law enforcement really didn't have a good grasp of how big the problem had become and continues to evolve. And it really preys on the human's desire to be helpful. That's really what it's about. It's about kind of an account takeover, and social engineering is a huge aspect of it. If we talk about the history of BEC, when it started, the organizations, small, mid-sized businesses, were certainly the ultimate victims and the one that were being targeted. But what was interesting at the time is when we saw these account takeovers happening, the fraudsters would then email typically into a bank employee, whatever bank that company has a relationship with, and they would try to social engineer and trick that bank employee into submitting fraudulent funds in support of some unauthorized requests, basically. And what I can tell you is financial institutions like Fifth Third and our peers will have a process and procedures in place that really dictate that we should not be moving any money based on any requests received via email or anything else, right? We need to validate those transactions. We need to contact our customers that may send us an email about a transaction like that. We should contact them at a good known number. It has to be a number on file. You can't really trust the information you get through the email. And we should, know our customer, have that conversation and validate that. So I will tell you there were a handful of times, again, preying on that human nature, that desire to be helpful, that we saw bank employees not follow the right process or not follow the right procedures, and fraud might have occurred. But more often than not, bank employees were doing the right thing and were following the right process. So while there was some success, it was not as far-reaching as it is. And as you see on the slide, in that 2015, 2016 timeframe, we really saw a shift. And I hate to give criminals credit, but I think for what they are trying to achieve, it was a meaningful adjustment for them. And while we still see attempts come into the banks, we don't see it nearly as often. And what will happen is once they compromise or have an account takeover of a business leader's email within an organization, they are typically targeting other employees within that organization with emails to them, again, doing the social engineering, trying to convince them that they should process this transaction based on the email that they received. And again, this I know I started by talking about BECs around account takeover. It very much is. It's typically your more senior leaders at an organization, your CEOs, your CFOs, your chief human resources officers. That's typically who they're targeting when they're trying to get access to that account or mimic a particular account if they're not able to successfully take it over. And so the BEC kind of flavor or type that we've seen the most and is the oldest is what we just call CEO-based BEC, which is very much what I talked about, just literally compromising or mimicking a CEO's email address and trying to get funds moved to a fraudulent account. But in recent years, we've seen many new flavors of this added. A big one that we're going to talk about through this, as we go through the presentation, is invoice-related BEC. And this is when they are getting within your supply chain and they may compromise an email account of somebody at one of your suppliers, one of your business partners, and they're sending emails over to have payment instructions, payment details altered, the account that the payment's supposed to go to. And that's one that's really exploded over the last couple of years, and we'll see some numbers on that. We're nearing the end of the year, right? So we're going to quickly kind of move into and through the holidays, and we're going to be to the new year, and it's in between that January and April, mid to late April window that we see W-2 business email compromise. It's tax season. And this is typically where they'll shift and they try to target a chief human resource officer and a company, and they're looking to get copies of everybody's W-2s. You can Google this. There's been a number of companies that have fallen victim to this and unfortunately, sent a subset or in many cases, all of their W-2s to a fraudster through this scam. We've seen payroll diversion. I can attest that here at the bank, we absolutely do a lot of communication and education around different fraud scams and business email compromise specifically. The bank is not, knocking on wood, and happy to report the bank has not been impacted significantly in any way, but we've seen payroll diversion attempts where basically somebody, they have not been able to successfully compromise one of our accounts, an email account of one of our executives, but they mimic one, and I'll get into details about that here shortly, but they'll mimic one of our executives and send an email to like our chief human resource officer, and that email will say, hey, I've just opened up a new bank account at another financial institution. I'd like my payroll to go there. Can you help me facilitate that change? Working for a bank, I always find that kind of humorous. It's kind of a red flag if one of our executives is opening accounts at other banks and wants their payroll checks to go there. So it makes me chuckle a little bit, but we have absolutely seen those attempts, and I know it's not funny when others have been impacted by that. And then the last flavor that we see, similar to the invoice, but it's legal and real estate. It's really getting in the middle of deals, business deals, real estate deals, and altering where those closing payments are going. Again, it's all about altering where payments might end up. Next slide, please. So again, as we talked about, human nature is the vulnerability here. It is absolutely preying on our nature to want to try to help other people. And so here I want to get into a little bit more detail about what I've been talking about on how they will send the emails and the different sophistication around their attempts. And so I'll start with the least sophisticated first. And again, this is when they've not been able to successfully compromise an account. You've all probably heard of the term spoofing. This is really pretty easy for anyone to do. This is when you alter the visible name of an email. So you can really kind of make that email appear to come from whoever you wanted to. And this is that old trick of when, if you just put your mouse over the email address, you should see the actual email that it's coming from. So it may appear that it's coming from John Smith at acmecompany.com, but when you mouse over it, you can see that it's actually coming from some other address altogether. It has the least barrier to entry. It's the least sophisticated. Unfortunately, it still works at times, but that's when they're not able to legitimately compromise. That's what they're going to kind of start out by doing. The next level up is still, they're not able to compromise the account, but they will set up another email account that looks almost identical to the one that you're looking for. And I think this is really pretty effective when you have small, mid-sized businesses that are using web-based emails like Office 365, Gmail, et cetera, because those are widely used domains that people have. But they will take, if you have the last name of McConnell or something like that, where it ends in 2 L's, they will change the first L to a lowercase I or a number 1 or something. So they understand that people are very busy. We're oftentimes multitasking. We're trying to work through one issue and get on to the next thing that we're working on, or get back to that project that we're focused on. And so they're banking on the fact that you're not going to notice that slight difference in the email address itself, right? So this is a little bit better, a little bit more sophisticated than spoofing, not overly sophisticated, but it's an actual real email address. And if you mouse over it, that's what you're going to see, because it is an actual email address. It just has a slight nuance or difference to it. And then the third type is when there's a genuine account takeover. This is where they have taken over the email account. They have access to it. This is their ultimate goal. And there's a number of reasons for that. Once they have access, there's a number of things they can do. They have access to all your contacts. They have access to your email history. They have access to previous threads. They know who you communicate with, how you communicate, if there are nicknames involved, if it's somebody that you've been doing business with for a long time. There's a number of social engineering benefits that they get when they have access. And another kind of frustrating thing, but smart thing that they do is they'll set up rules within the email system itself. So they'll go in and set up a rule where they can designate that emails received back to you from a particular domain or from a particular email address are hidden. Hey, any email that comes back from @acme.com, throw in this folder. It can be a new folder that they've created. It can be one of your old folders that's buried. You know, again, I don't know what your email boxes look like. I know what mine looks like, and I've got a ton of folders. And if somebody had unauthorized access to my email and set up a rule to dump emails into a folder that I don't use on a regular basis, it would take a while for me to know that that's happening. So again, there's a lot of things that they can do once they get access. And how do they get access? How do they successfully do that account takeover? Again, these are things that you're probably familiar with, right? The very first way that they're going to do it is phishing. We see a ton of Office 365 and Gmail and other types of phishing out there, right? And this is exactly why they're doing it. They are trying to be, steal your ID and password for your email, so they have that account takeover. Now, with a phish, if they successfully compromise that, they have access until you if you suspect that something might be going on, right? If you ever do suspect there's suspicious behavior, the first thing you're going to do is go change your password to your email account. If they were able to compromise your account via phishing, once you change that email password, you have effectively locked them out. They're going to have to social engineer you again or phish you again in order to get access to that account again. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to know how they did it. So I would add on here that if you do think there's been suspicious activity and you suspect some kind of account takeover, in addition to changing the password, absolutely the first step you want to take, I would also suggest that you have a computer security person come in and look at your computer, your environment, just to make sure. Because the second way that they're going to compromise your email account is through malware. And unfortunately, if malware gets on your device or within your environment, they have persistence. If you go to change your password, they are going to know that you changed your password. They're going to know what you changed it to. The type of malware and the type of criminals that we're talking about, they're using high-grade malware that has key logging capabilities. So they're capturing every keystroke that you have. So again, that's why I really, I think it's important that you have somebody come in and check your systems, your devices, to make sure that you don't have malware, because that password change, if malware is involved, is only kind of a really short-term temporary fix, and they're going to be back in that account very, very soon. And again, it's the most effective, right? Because they pick up so much additional information about, again, who you're communicating with, how you communicate, when you communicate, et cetera. And I think it's really effective to pick up an existing thread that you have to make it seem more legitimate to the recipient. And then, I'm sorry, can you go back just real quick?
Oh, yeah.
One more thing I wanted to share, that when you get these emails, right, there's always going to be a sense of urgency to them. They want you to remain in the email channel. They want to remain in the email channel because it allows them to be anonymous. They are not going to be able to come to the phone. They're not going to be able to get on the, again, answer a call. They know that banks and organizations have process in place to pick up the phone oftentimes and call and validate these transactions. And again, back to with the access that they have to the email accounts, they also have access to your calendar. They have access to information about your travel, and they can use some of that information to make the email seem more legitimate. And again, remember the shift from the target being the bank employee to now the employee within the targeted organization. So maybe the CEO has just taken a trip to London on business. The fraudster has access to the email, he knows that the CEO is traveling. He messages somebody in their accounts payable group and says, hey, I'm traveling to London on business. I'm working on a special project. I need it to remain very confidential. I need you to wire $250,000 to this account, right? Depending on the organization and the structure and the size, you may have somebody that's, the CEO is reaching out to me for help on a special project, something that they're working on. Again, preying on that desire to be helpful. Again, those type of details really help make the emails that are received by the targets more legitimate. So again, unfortunately, allows them to be pretty effective. But again, there's going to be that sense of urgency. There's going to be a reason that they can't come to the phone. We see a lot of they're in board meetings all day. They're in an all-day physical or doctor appointment. They're at their nephew's funeral. I don't know why it's the nephew that typically perishes in these scenarios, but I see nephews more than anything else. That they're at a funeral, and it's very important that this transaction happen, but they're not going to be able to get on the phone. Again, trying to force everything to stay in that email channel where they can remain anonymous. Next slide, please. And so what I wanted to do here was show these are real life examples of business email compromise emails that either we have seen come through the bank or that our customers have received. And you'll see some of the telltale signs that I've talked about. There's always a sense of urgency. They're not going to be able to get on any kind of phone call. There's other tells here as well. Not always, but oftentimes these criminals, English is not their first language. So you'll see words like kindly and other things like that are in these emails. It should give you some kind of an indicator that something may be off, right? Again, from a bank's perspective, we talk about knowing our customers all the time and having that really good relationship. Does the request even make sense? Does it feel right? Is this out of character, out of norm? Is the language that they're using, does that make sense? So I think it's always helpful to be able to see these type of examples to make it feel a little bit more real. This is what it's going to kind of look and feel like if you've ever experienced one of these. Next slide, please. As I talked about earlier, why CEO fraud, BEC fraud is the oldest, invoice is probably the one that's spiked the most over the last few years. It continues to be a significant type of BEC that we see today. This statistic is from late in 2020, but you can see the significant jump. And here is a great example. Again, I think it's really good to be able to see these examples, right? This is where they've compromised the email account of a supplier or a business partner, and they're basically, they're sending an email saying they're going through their own bank reconciliation and they're looking for information from you, right? So they're looking for open accounts, invoices, and they're going to look for the reason they're asking for that additional information is to understand where can they steal the most money from, where do we have the most outstanding payments that we can have diverted to another account. So you can see this is kind of a first stage of here's what we're doing. After the person responds with the requested information, I promise you there will be an email back that asks, okay, we're updating based on this bank reconciliation and changes on our side. We now need all our payments to go to this new account. Can you please update your systems? And bam, you have fraud. So hopefully that's helpful. And then, so how big is the impact? I've talked about it, right? This is actually a little bit older information. As you can see, this is from 2019. It was at 34 billion in losses, and that's just staggering to me. I want to be transparent. I look frequently for updates to this, and I've been surprised that the FBI has not updated this because, again, I know it continues to be a problem. And earlier this week, I saw someone talking about updated numbers from the FBI. And I was so happy that they have finally done a new PSA, public service announcement about business email compromise. It's actually up to 43 billion now. So it continues to increase year over year significantly. Again, being transparent, I thought that new PSA had just come out in the last couple of weeks because, again, I look frequently And I actually learned that it was released in late May of 2022. So somehow I missed it. I will certainly update my slides, but this is a $43 billion problem at this point. And you can see it's not just US based. It's been seen across all the 50 states, but in over 177 countries, and payments have been now sent to over 155 countries, that 140 countries information is dated. And just to get a little context here, as I mentioned, we started seeing this in 2012, 2013, but it started like everybody started realizing how big of a problem it was in like 2015 and 16. So the first FBI PSA on BEC came out June 14th of 16, and that was 3.1 billion in loss. And then the next PSA was released in May of 17, about 11 months later, and it had almost doubled to 5.3 billion. The next PSA came out in July of 2018, so roughly 14 months later. It had more than doubled to 12 billion in loss. And then you see the one I just told you about in May of 22, you see that this one had increased to over 26, and then it hit 34 last year. So 26 billion by 2019. So just, I wanted to give that perspective. You can see in roughly 4 straight years, more than doubled each time. Sitting here at 22, I guess we're at 43 billion. It hasn't doubled. Maybe that's good news. It doesn't feel like it because those numbers are staggering. Let's get into some of the best practices and things that you can do to help protect yourselves. And hopefully some of the things that I've talked about have kind of sparked some ideas. I think it's really important to put controls in place where you can around your payment and your payment processes. Dual approval is important, having a second set of eyes. We certainly see account takeovers where they're trying to, if that account that they take over has access to other systems and other applications, and there's only a single approval required, they can often help. Somebody else can initiate the payment, and it requires just a single approval that they can approve themselves to get fraudulent funds out the door. I talked about just knowing your partners, knowing your customers, and never accept requests through email or similar channels. It's very important that I think you put appropriate process and controls in place around where your money is flowing when it's leaving your organization. I think it's really important to contact the person making the request. Again, it should be a customer or an executive of yours, or someone. They may, maybe you're worried that they're going to be upset that you're reaching out to them, but I promise you, they're going to be thankful that you did, and much happier that you did if it was a fraudulent transaction versus just acting on it. And again, never trust the information that you get through the email. You can't, right? They want to be anonymous. They want to be in that channel. They may eventually say, you know what, I can't come to the phone. Call me at this number. Can't trust it, right? That's still going to be the fraudster on the other end. So it's very important that you're really looking for contact information that you have on record that you know is good. Monitor your accounts regularly. Really important, and a theme throughout this is educate your employees. I know it's not easy for everybody to have like a robust security awareness and education program, but I think around these type of threats and these types of risk, it's very important to spend a little bit of time here. The folks that are responsible for your payments, let them know about business email compromise. Let them know that this is something that can happen. Let them know that this is kind of what it looks and feels like, and wrap those processes and the controls and the rigor around it, and make sure that they understand what they are. Use multi-factor authentication provided by email providers whenever possible, right? It's another layer of authentication. So if I do phish you and I get your email ID and password, but you have multi-factor, that is an additional hurdle for me as a criminal or a fraudster that I have to overcome to get access to your account. I will tell you, in the malware world, it becomes easier. If they've got malware on your device, depending on what your multi-factor solution is, they may very well have access to that, but it's still an additional hurdle that they have to overcome in general, and we've really encouraged the use of that. Limit information shared on social media, LinkedIn, and other places about your role, what you do, your company, travel plans, other things like that that people like to put out on social media to talk about where they're going or what they're doing. I talked about the policies, procedures, make sure that they're in place. And then when possible, see if you can test that they're being followed. Are you able to do a phishing exercise? Are you able to do an exercise where you attempt a BEC just to see how your team reacts and what they do? And then I will always say, it's obviously very important to leverage appropriate security tools and controls just to protect your environment. A lot of times we've talked about antivirus. So, a lot of us are familiar with the traditional antivirus, McAfee's and Symantec's and Trend Micros and companies like that. And they're good companies with overall good products, but your traditional antivirus, which was very much signature based, is really not going to help in today's world. I would not get rid of them, but you're really looking for a more advanced anti-malware, endpoint detection type technology. Those companies I mentioned have products like that. They've evolved, but those type of products don't rely on signatures to detect a particular piece of malware, which is very easy to alter or evade. It's more about heuristics. It's observing the behavior of the file that you're interacting with that might have come through your email or the link that you're clicking in your email to go visit. So really would emphasize that. Web proxy is another important tool here. The web proxy, for those aren't familiar, is what controls what type of websites you can get to. I'm not getting into whether you should allow access to sporting sites, ESPN.com or whatever. Those are business decisions, but you can certainly leverage a web proxy to limit what comes in and what goes out of your organization. So I would encourage that. All right, let's jump into ransomware. So I think BEC doesn't get nearly as much attention as ransomware. I will tell you that I think the financial impacts are more significant on the BEC side, but ransomware is absolutely a significant problem, and the impacts are real and tend to be more operational. This slide is just really to show the trends. Ransoms themselves continue to grow and increase, and the number of attacks that we see continue to explode. I'll talk a little bit about some of the ransoms, but just ones that have been fairly publicized. The travel company Carlson Wagenlied, I have it on. I don't think they've acknowledged it, but it's really pretty good authority based on open source intel that they paid a ransomware of $4.5 million. CNA Financial reportedly paid $40 million. JBS paid $11 million. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack that I think a number of us heard about on the news resulted in $5 million of ransom being paid. They're not all going to be in the millions, but you can see that the median or the average price is increasing, but you will absolutely see $1 million ransoms, and we see more of them today than we've seen in a long time. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm going to talk mostly to what's on the left, but I just wanted to, this is an older slide for me. If we look at the top right section from the media, these are a little bit older, but this was a deck I was putting together a few years ago, and I was looking to update it, and I literally went out to Google, and I Googled ransomware attacks, and I clicked the news tab, and these were 5 of like the first 8 headlines in recent days or weeks around ransomware attacks. And I leave them in here because, again, what's important for me here is to show all types of industry, all sizes of companies are impacted. No one is immune to this. You've got an IT services giant, you've got an aerospace company, you've got universities impacted, Honda, Accion, and you see some of the names below. I've mentioned a few of them. I've bolded Accion and Kaseya because those are were super impactful because they were supply chain attacks. If you're not familiar, those are scenarios where criminals and malware, ransomware actors gained access to these organizations. And these are software supply companies where legitimate businesses that use their software periodically will go to their legitimate site to download new versions of their software that's supposed to be legitimate, validated, safe software versions. And they were able to manipulate some of those software packages and put ransomware in those. And so you had customers of these companies that were going where they were supposed to be going to download a legitimate copy of software to upgrade their platform or their, that they're using, and they were being infected with ransomware. So if I jump to the left, why are we seeing the increase that we're talking about? And I really think the biggest reason is what we call RAS, or ransomware as a service. It's basically a business now. There are several ransomware organizations and ransomware families that have turned this into an operational business, which has significantly lowered the barrier for people that want to do this. You go back just a few years and you had to have a fairly sophisticated group of folks to be able to write the malware, write the ransomware, be able to deliver it into an organization, be able to help manage it in the environment, find the appropriate targets, deploy it within the environment, handle the negotiations, handle the payments, all of that. And now they basically have an affiliate network. People come to them that have none of those skills or capabilities. They just want to be criminal. They want to get into the business. And so they basically become affiliates of these ransomware families. These air quoting organizations provide them the ransomware. They help them get it deployed. And all they do is ask for a fairly significant cut of the ransoms that these affiliates are getting. So these affiliates are encouraged to go out and infect as many people as they can. And the organization, again, will get a pretty significant cut of the ransomware. Another interesting trend that we've seen is, again, they just want people to pay. So they have started, again, I hate to give criminals credit, but I thought about this for years as a security professional. They already have access to the environment. They've got malware in the environment, right? And so what they used to do is simply just encrypt everything, right? They were causing a significant operational impact to you and your company. And they pay us and we'll give you the decryption key so you can get back to running your business. That worked a number of times, but not always, right? And so what we've seen is a shift where now this is what I was saying, they have access to your environment. They have malware in your environment already. So now they are stealing a copy of your data, exfiltrating it out of your organization. They may or may not still encrypt everything, and again, cause harm to your operations. And then they create these shaming sites. These different malware families have different sites out there where they are proud to announce who their victims are. They share a snippet of the data and they threaten to release that information if you don't pay the ransom. We see the threats of DDoS attacks being added, where they're gonna throw DDoS attacks at you if you don't pay. They literally are trying to pull out all the stops to entice you and force you to make that ransom payment. And we've even seen where they've now started contacting customers of impacted victims to let them know that, hey, we have some of your data because we infected and put ransomware in this environment, and you should really encourage that company to pay or we're going to release your information. So it is really a nasty problem and a really tough place to be in. Down towards the bottom of this, I just wanted to reiterate the rise in ransomware and the impacts. We've seen a shift in coverage and requirements for cyber insurance. So I just want to mention that. I think it's something to pay attention to. And then the U.S. Department of Treasury through OFAC has, in the last probably 12 to 18 months now, revised guidance and sanctions against companies that facilitate ransomware payments. So again, making it really difficult for people to be able to respond and react to these type of attacks. Next slide, please. Not going to go through a bunch on this slide. As I kind of shared from the previous slide and just the example of the random 5 news stories I grabbed from probably a few years ago, all industries are being impacted. We certainly do see small and mid-sized businesses being impacted more often. And I think that is probably just, related to maybe a smaller number of resources, potentially fewer controls in the environment to help protect or respond to these type of things. But again, this slide does a really wonderful job of just demonstrating how everyone's being impacted. Nobody is immune. Everyone should, this should be top of mind for everyone. Next slide, please. I'm not going to get a whole bunch into whether you should pay or not. Ultimately, that's going to be a business decision. The FBI, I think, is more helpful than they used to be. They certainly want to help people. Their official recommendation is going to be not to pay the ransom, but again, they understand as well it's going to be a business decision. But I'm going to cover, just in the interest of time, the next few slides fairly quickly. There's not a lot of in-depth stuff there, but I want to cover some things that you should consider when you're making that decision about whether to pay or not. Again, it's a business decision, but it's going to be dependent on the bad actor, and I think this is where the FBI will help you. They will let you know if the group that you're dealing with, if they know who they are, if they are reputable, if you pay, if you're likely to get your information back or access to your systems back. As I just noted with the OFAC regulation, there could be additional regulatory fines or other sanctions that you may expose yourself to. Payment is absolutely no guarantee of data recovery. Payment is no guarantee of destruction of any data that they may have stolen. Again, talking about that shift in trends. Payment does, based on the numbers we see, increase the chances of being targeted again. And then when they do give you the decryption keys back, if they've encrypted all of your information, they've impacted you operationally, you may pay, you may get your decryption keys back, but again, they might write a very effective and efficient process and application to encrypt all your stuff. They don't care about how effective the decryption process is. So it could be a very slow process, and the performance itself may be extremely poor, which just causes you additional downtime around that process. Next slide. Okay, so we've seen some of numbers similar to this. This is from a more recent event that I saw earlier this year, but the average ransomware continues to increase. And again, this is the ransom itself. It doesn't it does not include all the other costs that you are going to experience related to operational downtime, et cetera, right? And so as you see here, on average, the overall cost tends to be 5 to 10 times that. And I have a couple additional things to just share there. Universal Health Services was impacted by ransomware. They reported in their annual report approximately $67 million in overall cost impact from their attack. Cognizant estimated that the attacks they experienced impacted their earnings by $50 to $70 million. So just 2 examples of the the ransom is just one piece of this, right? It's all the other impacts of downtime and recovery and loss of customers, loss of confidence that impact you. Next slide, please. So let's look at what happens when you do pay. Roughly 58, according to this study, roughly 58% of organizations agree to pay the ransom. In 2021, 54% of those regained access to data or systems after the first payment. So roughly half. Next slide, please. 32% of those received additional ransom demands and eventually regained access, right? But still, hey, we want $1 million. Okay, we're going to give you $1 million. How about another 500,000 on top of that? right? They have the leverage at that point, right? And so unfortunately, you're dealing with criminals. Next, 10% of the folks refused to pay any additional ransom and walked away without any of their data. And then last, 4% never got access to any of their information. And again, I think it's important. I know I said it on a previous slide, but that shift in trend of them stealing the data first. Again, I hate to give them credit, but it's a significant impact, right? And so even if they do the encryption and you pay and you get your decryption keys back, how are you ever going to be certain that they have destroyed or gotten rid of the information that they've stolen from you? I mean, there's really no way to know. And so I think it just reinforces the importance of kind of preventing this stuff. One more, next slide, please. So again, what if you do pay? I shared earlier that if you pay, you are likely to see additional attacks. 80% of organizations who have paid the ransom incur some type of subsequent attack. And you can see here within the number of days. They view you as a potentially weak target, and you've already been willing to pay. How quickly are you to address and remediate the issues that allowed them in the first time? They're going to try to take advantage of that. All right, I know we got about 8 minutes left. I want to jump into the best practices. Most importantly, what do we do to try to prevent this? I will tell you, again, the very first thing here, right, keeping this stuff out of your environment has always been very important. But when before they started stealing the data, I really emphasized the backup plan. Of course, you want to keep this stuff out of your environment, and you want to be able to detect it quickly when it comes in. But a sound data backup plan is super important here, and it gives you options. Without this, you are extremely limited. But, and I'm going to talk about that, but given the shift that we've talked about, it's more and more important to keep this stuff out of your environment. So it's important that you have the right security controls. You have antivirus, you have anti-malware, you have those endpoint protections, because again, we're seeing them use that to steal data, then deploy the ransomware and do the encryption. Back to having a sound data backup plan. And I talk about a few bullets down. Revisit your network and security architecture. Segment your network. This ties into that. If you have a very flat network, and if they're able to get in your environment with malware and ransomware, they're likely going to not only encrypt your production environment, they'll probably have access to your backup systems and your backup data. And if those get encrypted, you're limited. There's not going to be a lot that you can do, but consider paying. If you don't have a good backup plan, if you don't have good backups, you're going to be looking at paying. When you do have a sound backup plan, you have your network segmented, so you isolate the overall impact. You protect your backups so they're not impacted. You give yourself options. You may not even have to consider paying the ransom. You are absolutely going to have operational impact. You're going to have some downtime, but you can rebuild leveraging your backups, and you can get back up within a reasonable amount of time. But it's important, that next bullet, that you've tested your backup plan. It's one thing to have the plan, to have all these things in place, but I strongly encourage you, test that backup plan. Make sure that you know what it looks and feels like to recover when everything is down and you can't get to it. Develop an incident response plan. Maintain a diligent and comprehensive vulnerability management program, right? This is testing your network from the outside looking in, an attacker's view, making sure you're patching your systems and your applications, and that you're closing all of the the windows or opportunities that they have to get in your network. Again, very important to keep them out at this point. I talked about a web proxy earlier, of course, firewall and other security related technologies. The importance of a security awareness program, again, a phishing exercise, right? It just takes one of your employees clicking the wrong email and you could be dealing with this type of problem. Have disaster response and recovery procedures, test those, go ahead and proactively build a relationship with the local FBI office and other law enforcement partners so you have a contact if you need to pick up the phone. And again, exercise and test all of this as much as you're able to make sure that you're protected. I think that's all I have from a presentation perspective. I will share there are a couple additional resources I've included, both kind of informational resources to learn more about these threats, but also some helpful resources post-incident or breach, and even a business checklist of kind of some of the best practices that you can take and try to implement within your organizations. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Happy to answer any questions we have over the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was really great, very eye-opening. I definitely learned a lot. And as mentioned, if you're on the call, you will get access to this presentation so that you can look through it and kind of, go back to any specific areas. And the business checklist that Tom mentioned is also included here. So I just wanted to show this to you guys so you know that you'll be getting this. But one question we had, Tom, is we have someone who is a small business owner and she is inquiring about cybersecurity insurance. Is that something that you would recommend? And if so, are there things to look for in a policy that you would recommend? Oh. Tom, are you there?
Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I am here. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would recommend a cyber insurance, or at least exploring it. It depends, I think, on the size of the organization. When you go to get a policy, they're going to get involved and they're going to want to understand more about your business and what controls you have in place. Those are going to be factors that they consider as they think about underwriting a particular policy. You can get coverage for certain ransomware events, even paying the ransom, et cetera. What I would caution around cyber insurance, I don't know how you all are with your own personal insurance policies and the things that we have to deal with, but the devil's in the details. I think it's very important that you fully understand the requirements that are laid out within your cyber policy. One that trips people up frequently is notification. Some of these insurance policies require that you notify them within 24 hours of an attack. And if you don't, you're not covered, right? And so that's just one good example, but there are others, right? Again, insurance policies can be very detailed and long, but I think it's very important that you have went through them with a fine tooth comb and really understand what you're obligated to do and what you need to be able to demonstrate if you're going to be covered.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point, making sure that you're able to adhere to whatever that is so you can reap those benefits. And then I think we might have time for just one more quick question. I see a question that says, is being on an internet dedicated service helpful? I'm not quite sure what it was.
Yeah, so an internet dedicated service, I'm going to equate that to like a VPN, which is a virtual private network. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that term, but a VPN type connection is going to be encrypted and should protect the transmission of the information between that. So I would strongly encourage that. Kind of the contrary to that, you've heard this before, be very careful where you're conducting business, where you're interacting with banking sites or other, whether it be personal or business. If you're sitting in a Starbucks on their free Wi-Fi, you are not in a protected environment. And that information is not going to be adequately protected, right? I think you want to try to get with it, if you can leverage VPN, that's a really good way to conduct business and make sure that the information is protected, adequately protected.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Tom, for all of that and just really helping kind of open our eyes to what's going on out there and how we can protect ourselves. So I really want to thank you for your expertise. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. If you still had questions, don't worry, all the resources will be included in the follow-up email that you should see in your inbox by tomorrow. Thank you to our partner, Fifth Third Bank. Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us today.